Vinod Khosla doesn't need an introduction. But as all of you know, Vinod, you were born in Pune.
Yep.
Pune, right? Went to IIT Delhi, came to the US, went to Carnegie Mellon, then went to Stanford, did a bunch of other stuff, and then co-founded Sun Microsystems, 1982. I think all of you know Sun. Joined Kleiner Perkins, 1986. 18 years at Kleiner, many iconic companies he's invested in. And then 2004, you founded Khosla Ventures, which we all know of. Vinod, as all of you know, is a truly legendary investor that we all look up to. And what's on the slide is a few of the companies, Vinod, that you have invested in over the years. And my gosh, what a list, from OpenAI to Stripe to DoorDash to Juniper. So thank you, Vinod, for joining us. Truly a privilege to host you. So the first question I have, Vinod, is, like, what do you look for when you invest in companies?
So Juniper is a good example. It's built two things. First, the founder, and second, something nobody else is thinking of doing. So as odd as it seems today, there was not a single company that was not only doing, but willing to do TCP/IP for the internet, for the public internet. And I said, perfect, so we'll do that. They didn't believe the internet would be TCP/IP. In fact, I consider that the single biggest achievement in my life, when every company told me they'd never adapt AT&T, TCP/IP. And so we had a contrarian belief and a really good founder in Pradeep Sindhu. And we worked together for 6 months because we were going against the grain of all customer surveys and all competitive surveys.
So is that something you actively, is that sort of a core belief
that
you have?
Things that people aren't doing. OpenAI was exactly that. Everybody thought it was ridiculous. Today,
it was a research project, right?
It was a research project in a nonprofit. They didn't have any product plans, any revenue plans, anything. In fact, in the 20 years we've had Khosla Ventures, it's the only time I wrote an apology letter to my LPs when making the investment, saying this sounds odd, it's weird in many ways, but we're making it anyway, sorry. So I apologize ahead of time.
Yeah.
And only time in 20 years, or actually 40 years.
But what did you see? Let's double click a little bit on OpenAI. What did you see in OpenAI, Vinod, at the time?
This is a common trend, right? If you believe what everybody else believes, you're going to build an interesting, okay company, not something revolutionary. And this especially too, I see this in the Indian environment, people aren't bold enough. Juniper and OpenAI had the same thing in common. We started TCP/IP as our only network at Sun in 1982. I saw TCP/IP grow. By 96, it was clear it was at the knee of the exponential curve. And it just ignored the fact that everybody else was saying they wouldn't use TCP/IP, including customers, which is sort of dangerous, but if you believe something, you believe something.
But
my point is, I saw the data, not the experts. I ignored the experts. Same thing happened with OpenAI. I saw the data and the rate of progress of AI and the influx of talent into AI. I'd been watching it for a while. I think it was 2012, I wrote my first blog saying, do we need doctors and do we need teachers, under the assumption AI would do both those things. And it's almost certain that'll both happen. Like, there's no chance a human tutor can keep up in, say, educating a 6th grade kid with an AI tutor. There's no chance a human doctor can keep up with an AI doctor. And I'm talking within 5 years or less in both those cases. So I saw the progression of capability of AI, and I ignored the silly stories of it recommended a pregnancy test for an 83-year-old male. And there was plenty of silly examples too. And people in the press focused on that. I focused on the data and the input, which was great talent, the best talent going into it, and said, there's going to be an inflection point. I don't know when, but when it happens, it's going to be large. Those were two very, very similar stories.
What about impossible foods? Or impossible?
Same idea. Nobody
had done it before.
Nobody had done it. In fact, plant proteins wasn't a word that was used. We just said the world needs a different source of protein. Obviously, meat consumption in India and China, especially, growing at one of the fastest rates ever. As societies get richer, they go towards protein, and it wasn't a scalable, sustainable thing. We also believed in every way, and still do today, that these products would be tastier than natural meat, because cows evolved sort of slowly.
Very slowly. But they don't yet taste as good, or do they? I mean, I guess it depends.
It depends on the product. If you look at the Impossible Foods chicken McNuggets, almost every time they beat regular chicken McNuggets by a lot in taste tests, blind taste tests. Not true of beef yet, but yeah, it's sort of going to happen soon.
Got it. Now let's maybe, so you have the market opportunity and you have the founder, or the founding team. Talk a little bit about what are you looking for in the founding team? What are those traits that you look for? What makes a great founder?
When I met Jack Dorsey, a number of people had turned him down. By the way, if you look at his Wikipedia page, he had 4 failed startups. So, but he had characteristics about clear thinking and a very clear vision. Also had something else I'm very passionate about, a strong design aesthetic. I'm passionate about design. I think it's key. These details are key to a lot of different things. So we liked him. And nobody had built a successful business in small business since Intuit, which we invested in, it must be 1990 or 91 or somewhere in the early 90s. Right? And nobody had since then built a small business-based company. And
since Intuit, nobody had done it?
No. There was no successful company based on retail.
Selling to small businesses.
Yeah,
right.
Really small businesses. And so we liked the idea. We liked the market. It was huge if successful. And this is a characteristic, right? I find many investors, especially in places like Europe and India, I'd lump the two together, like lower risk. And they reduce risk to the point where the probability of success goes up, the consequences of success go down. And that you can do fine that way. I like a higher probability of failure, but a large consequence of success. Square was exactly that, as was GitLab. It was 3 or 4 people when we invested in SID. And, but DevOps wasn't a thing. Nobody talked, the word DevOps didn't exist. And there's a theme here, because AI wasn't an investment thing when we invest in OpenAI. Plant proteins wasn't a thing or a category when we invest in OpenAI. Small business, nobody was addressing. And fintech wasn't a word when we invested in Square. We were pretty lucky to invest in Square, Stripe, and Affirm pretty close together because we believed in what ended up being called fintech. And DevOps wasn't a thing in GitLab. So it's finding a category that you know is going to emerge, but nobody else is thinking about it or using those words. So by and large, investors like known categories. Are you investing in fintech? Yes. Well, unknown categories lead to much bigger companies if you're right. If you're alone in your view that it's important and you're right, then you get very large outcomes.
What is an example? You're absolutely right. What are 1 or 2 bets that didn't work? Because either you got the market wrong or you got the team. You didn't make the right call on the team.
boy, that list is long. One of the things we've done is done a pretty good job of cutting off losses early, and so they're not huge. But Cure is an example of a biofuels company, so that was an area. And I think biofuels as an area will be profitable for us, even though the area didn't work out for lots of reasons I can get into. The area itself will be profitable, even though it got a bad name. In fact, CleanTech 1.0 was very profitable for us, even if it got announced, because we did it differently than almost everybody else, right? We took a different approach. For example, since 2011, we haven't invested in plant proteins a lot because it got so hyped up and all the valuations got crazy. So we stopped, after pioneering the category, we stopped investing. Impossible was really profitable, no matter what price it ends up at, because we bought 40% of the company for $3 million.
40% for $3 million, Impossible.
Yeah. Because nobody was investing. That's the key. And then
because you're going you're literally the first company to do it. It's a highly
we also
uncertain,
invested in a company called Just Eggs, but we got 30%.
What does Just Eggs do?
It's now called Hampton Creek. They make egg protein. But we bought, I think, 30 or 40% of the company for $400,000. And so when these categories are unknown, you're not competing with 16 other VCs like you are today in AI, bidding for things.
And does that also mean, Vinod, that if a category
and by the way, Rocket Lab's not up there. We bought 33% of Rocket Lab for $5 million. It's now
because again, it was very early.
Very early, nobody was investing in rockets. Category creation, it's now worth 15 or probably more than $15 billion, and we still own most of our stock, right? And we were patient about it. And GitLab was the same way. So I think this idea of going after, in fact, most of those, when we invested, wasn't a category. Yeah. There was nothing like it. Yeah. In fact, we bought 10% of DoorDash for $1 million and 10% of Instacart for $1 million. So no matter what you do.
Are you still able to do that, like your new investments that you're making?
I hope some of them turn out that way.
Are you able to get those sorts because you're still doing the same thing, right? Going very early.
We're going very early. Yeah. And by the way, you were talking about the 2,500x return in Juniper, but DoorDash and Instacart were probably not that different than either 500 or 1,000x, right? And that's happened a couple of times. I suspect Rocket Lab is somewhat similar.
Terrific.
All billion-dollar plus outcomes mostly.
Which is insane.
Yeah, try and be bolder is my key message. It's not the return that counts, it's the level of boldness. That's what you can control.
Yeah, true. Let's now, as I was saying, these are all our founders here, early stage companies. In the early days of these companies and many, many others that you've invested in, what makes a difference? What are the things that you got to get right if you're going to build an enduring company?
By far, the single biggest thing is the team you build. And people always misconstrue what it means to build a great team. Your plan, the company you build is the team you build, not the plan you make. Because a great team, if your plan is off, will evolve the plan, especially if you have the culture of discussion, debate, and all that. So I find in most cases, plans evolve. It's pretty rare for plans not to evolve. Juniper was one that didn't evolve. But Square, GitLab, a lot of these.
When you say plans, you mean like pivots, the business?
Yeah,
there many
pivots, iterations, tack left, tack right, get to the right place because you have a great team that helps you find the problems early and fix them early and find the opportunity early and go chase them earlier. So the team you build is by far the biggest. So what are common mistakes in that area? And I have a paper that's probably 15 years old now on our website called Engineering the Gene Pool of a Startup. You want to compose a team for the risk your opportunity faces, right? not who you happen to know, who's a close friend. All of you have probably hired people who are close friends or you happen to know. They're not necessarily the best people. I always say, analyze the risks for the business you want to go in, and then engineer the people you're hiring, especially the first 5 or 10, for those risks, not who you know. Or obviously, if there's somebody great, you hire them independent of whether they're related to those risks or not. One of the best things I learned at Sun was hire everybody you can who's exceptional. And that's why we ended up with so many billion-dollar companies built out of Sun. We had Andy Bechtolsheim, and that's a fun story because he actually wanted me to license all his technology for $10,000.
Really?
Yeah. And he'd done this 6 times before as a graduate student at Stanford. And I said, I don't want the technology. I want the goose that laid the golden egg. I don't want the golden egg. That was my exact quote to him. And I gave up half my equity to get him, and it's the best decision I ever made.
Rest is history.
Also, take Juniper.
Yeah, let's take Juniper.
Very clearly, Pradeep was a systems architect. He had been at Sun architecting Spark microprocessors. And we said, what else do we need? We need a silicon expert. We need a protocol expert. And so we laid out these areas and found the best people. We need an operational person because we were building a public network.
And do you find the absolute best person for that specific
function? Okay. Right? In fact, the more detailed process is for each risk I identify, I say, find the 3 or 4 companies that have skills in addressing that risk. Then find 3 or 4 people in each of these companies. So you then end up with a list of 15 candidates for each risk and go after all of them and hire the best one you can. At least one, sometimes 2.
And this is something you guys do proactively with each company?
Yeah, it's very well defined in this thing on our website somewhere. I like to reduce the process of a startup to as much sort of actionable scientific advice. If you sort of say, go hire the best people or A people, it's not actionable. This is very, very specific of how you build a team. Yeah. Right? And so the team is clearly the right thing, and then picking roughly the right market, knowing you can adjust and change. Yeah.
So I'd say, team is most important by far. What are the other 2 or 3 things that really matter in the early days?
Picking the right rough market. And then I think the culture becomes important where you believe in your vision, but you have enough flexible. So you I like to say, you have to be obstinate about your vision and flexible about your tactics. So discovering how to address a market is a series of iterations. They may not be major pivots, they're minor changes, and you keep adjusting direction. Some CEOs are so passionate about the original thing and they think they're right, they won't change their tactics. And this flexibility and experimenting with lots of different ways to approach the market is absolutely key to discovering it. Classic example of that, there was lots of startups like Facebook, but Facebook was most flexible in adjusting many times and adapting and having your antennas up to see everybody else who's successful, see what's working for them, what you're trying. So experimentation, I think, early in the company is key.
Got it. Let's talk about another topic you've spoken a fair bit about, Vinod, which is failure. Mm-hmm. You have some strong points of view on failure. So, share with the founders how you think about failure.
So there's a Harvard Business School case that has a quote from me as its first line, which is, my willingness to fail allows me to succeed. If you want to be sure you don't fail, you're not going to take any risks. And then you're going to do incremental things that are pretty well understood. And you can still build a good company, don't get me wrong. It just won't be revolutionary. So being willing to take risks and fail is absolutely key. I heard many years ago that Tata had an award for the best failure of the year. Not the best performance of the year, but the best failure. And the reason was they wanted to encourage intelligent experimentation of things that aren't certain that might fail. Look, if you're going to take a risk, there's some chance of failure, and you have to be willing to do that if you're innovating at all. If you're not taking risks, you're probably not innovating. And so those go together, and people have an aversion to failure. I don't. You know, I said this earlier. The important thing is when you're failing to recognize it early and invest less per failure or something like that.
And just say more a little bit. Say a little bit more. What is it? Because you've had so much success, Vinod, that you're okay to fail? I mean, you know, right? Like as you said, if you're not willing to fail, you're not going to. You're going to.
I don't think that's the case. I think it's an attitude you have. When we started Sun, we were this really tiny group with less funding and fewer people than DEC's local sales office, right? We are a fraction of the size of the local sales office. And many, many people, including many VCs, advised me, why don't you build graphic terminals for DEC access? That's a safer market. And I said, no, we're building distributed computing. And most people didn't even know what, and that term didn't exist. In one of the funny stories, one of the most requested early features was to delete Ethernet so people didn't have to pay for Ethernet. Like, as silly as it sounds today. But we said we were building distributed computing, and NFS and all that was to come, but it still wasn't there. But we stayed true to that vision. We didn't say, let's just become a partner with DEC and start selling graphics terminals. There were companies like Evans and Sutherland and others doing that effectively. And it would have been a decent business. But we wanted to do something bigger, bolder. And because of that, we got a bigger, bolder company. Now, we could have more easily failed, but
you'd rather go change an industry, be the first pioneer, right, than be a also-ran. AI, lots going on. I had two questions. One, where is this going over the next, let's say, 2 or 3 years? And especially, maybe you can talk about 2 areas at the model layer. You know, there's a lot going on, especially with DeepSeek and some of these other things. And one of the things I think everybody worries about is something we call OpenAI roadkill. Yeah. Right? The next release just wipes you out. So talk about both of those. At the model layer, how's this playing out? What does it mean? And then...
So first thing, I expect things to move faster than anybody in this room probably expects. I say probably because somebody may be more optimistic than me, but pretty unlikely. And almost certainly all the bets on the rate of progression of capability in AI systems have been too pessimistic. And I don't think that will change in the next 2-3 years. In fact, we are very closely approaching the time when AI will design AI, the next model. AI will be an AI scientist for AI, and it'll do a hypothesis.
So the next model could be designed by AI?
Well, the following process almost certainly going to start this year. And AI says, here's my hypothesis on something else to try. It then writes the code, runs the code, sees the result, and then either abandons that, it didn't work, or it tries the next thing. And of course, it's infinitely more scalable than human AI scientists. So that's pretty exciting to me, and that'll cause an exponential increase in the level of capability. You know, whether scaling laws have run out or not, it doesn't matter, because there's so many new ways to approach AI to add different...
To keep improving capability.
Yeah, in other dimensions. You know, a year ago, everybody was saying it can't reason, it's a parrot going away. can reason better than most humans today, at least O3 can, right? So I do think in all dimensions, it'll accelerate faster than people think. And in higher dimensionality, which means other approaches or other domains. Like we're just looking at something I'm super excited about, an AI model for developmental biology. How do you take a stem cell and how does it differentiate into a cardiac cell or a spleen cell or a muscle cell? It's a different foundation model. Now, 10 years from now, it may be part of the same large model, but I think for a while, data generation capability in that area becomes really important. Now, there's other versions of that in other areas. And so it's pretty exciting time. And we spend a lot of time with our founders on what will be roadkill and what won't be.
And what's a good way to think about that? Let's spend some time on that.
You know, there's not a single good way. It depends on the startup. So we spend a lot of time on this issue in our shop. And we have a lot of expertise in this area. So we, essentially help our founders with that. But let me give you an example. There was a number of video models.
Yeah.
Right? Video model startups, there's Pika, and there's Runway, and there's a whole bunch of others. We had a company called Moon Valley, and when Sora came out, the founder called me and said, "What should I do? It's pretty impressive." And we worked on it, and in fact, instead of building a video model, we said we'll build a videographer. Now, what does a videographer do? Change camera angles, controls, lighting, what somebody in Hollywood does. All of us can point a camera at a scene, but all the other things a good videographer does is different. So we decided to differentiate along those lines and said, if somebody ends up with a better video model, we'll use it, but we're going to do a whole bunch of other things that can control what you produce at fine-grained. So that's an example of how you avoid roadkill.
Okay, with that, I know you got to run. Thank you, Vinod.
Thank you.
Let's give Vinod a big round of applause.